inspiration, and leadership, which means this presentation is a mashup of basically my 3 favorite things. If you're a fan of Sound of Music, you can start playing that song in the back of your head. Leadership, curriculum design, and design thinking. A particular approach that I use within engineering, a thought process for having the human, the individual, at the center of the focus of what it is I'm working on. So this presentation, it's a workshop, really. You guys are going to be doing things today. You're not just going to get to listen to me yammer on for the next hour. But we're going to do some things together collaboratively as a group, as well as some activities that you can work on to reflect on the courses that you are either an instructor in, a TA for, or maybe a course that you, if you're a TA as a graduate student and you're going to be teaching down the road as a faculty member, to be thinking about how can you actually integrate some leadership into your courses. And so, just as a quick overview, the couple of goals that I have today is to introduce everyone to this idea of design thinking. What the heck does she mean? What does this look like? How does it work? But specifically, how do we use that to create leadership activities within my program in engineering leadership? Just as an example, kind of a case study to illustrate how this works, but it's really cross-disciplinary. You can use a lot of these same principles outside of engineering across the college. So the other thing we're going to do is I'm going to introduce a framework that I use regularly in curriculum design. I call it GAPA for short, and we'll get into what that acronym means, how it works, and how it's used before we finish today. And then the final thing I want you all to be able to walk away with is a tangible activity, something that you can actually do the next time you teach this course that you're in right now, or the next time you're TAing, whatever. So, quick show of hands, how many people are faculty? How many are graduate students? I wondered. I met a couple of you earlier and I was like, I wonder if they gravitated. Okay, that'll be interesting. Excited to see. What about staff? Do we have, okay, some administrative roles? So those of you that are staff, do you have teaching responsibilities? Or at least support people with teaching responsibilities? Okay, great. All right, so I have a feel we have a little bit of everything mixed in, so this will be fun to hear the variety of perspectives. So the very first thing I want to introduce is this idea of design thinking. Design thinking is really, like I said, it's the focus on the individual. Not so much the solution, as you do focus on the person that you are developing a solution for. So you start with the individual. So the process that you follow, and this is going to be very high level, feel free to talk to me later if you want to get deeper into this, but let's be honest, we only have an hour. So design thinking starts with inspiration. You have to begin to understand who is it you're designing for? What is it you're designing? Who are you helping? What is this course? Why does it matter? What's going on? That's where you begin. Any design process, whether it's curriculum, products, services, anything you create designing in a human-centered design perspective, a design thinking perspective, you start with the human, the person, the group of people you're designing for. Once you've begun to understand who that person is, who that group is, if you're working on something that's going to go beyond that one individual, you then begin ideating, generating some ideas. What could the future for this individual actually look like? What could this class, this activity, what could it be? What would my goals be? How would I actually help my students learn something? How would I help them begin to develop these skills as leaders? What are the skills that I care about? That's where you begin with ideation. You begin to actually dig in and figure out what are some ideas of how I can get those individuals that I have invested in and I've gotten to know, how do I help them get to that future that is so important for them as students? That learning. So we start with inspiration, then we go to ideation, and then we go to implementation. Now, as I will attest, I'm an engineer. As an engineer, my default mode is implementation. My default is I'm going to just jump in. I know what's right. As an instructor, that is also my tendency because I feel this responsibility to make sure that my students learn something that I think is important. So more often than not, my default is I'm just going to implement what sounds right to me, what works for me, what I learned as a student myself, what my instructors, how they taught. So that's my default. But what I want to encourage us to do today is take a moment to pause and think about how do the needs of our students and the ideas we have for meeting those needs, what they need to learn, those lessons that are important, how do we actually implement them in such a way that's meaningful to them? So for me, this is exciting because we're taking a principle from design and engineering and being able to develop it in such a way and use it in such a way that we can actually intervene in the lives of our students and hopefully teach them something powerful for this workshop in the leadership space. So the first thing I want you to do is if you look on your sheet of paper, or the sheets of paper on your table, the smaller sheets of paper are an interview recording form. Yeah, so go ahead and grab one of those each. So the task that I have for you for the next little bit is I want you to begin gaining some inspiration, some idea of the students that you're designing for. And the way I want you to do this, rather than just sit on your own, so I may encourage those of you that walked in at the very last minute, come join another table. Pair up with somebody. I want you to interview each other about your students. The class that, pick a class, a group of students that you are invested in, that you want to see develop their leadership skills. Pick a course, pick an activity, and I want you to interview each other. And the reason I have you interview each other is that sometimes we hear details when we listen to somebody else that we don't see for ourselves. So if these two ladies are going to pair with each other, you will interview her about her students, her courses, what's it like, how are those students motivated, how do they get excited, how do they best learn, what are their unique strengths, maybe weaknesses. So interview each other and then reflect on those interview notes. And so the form, this is actually something that we use in a human-centered design course. So I send my students out very first day and I say, go interview. Find a college student. What makes them tick? What makes them happy? What makes them unhappy? But you'll notice one of the prompts is the assumptions that they have going out. So I want you to spend a little time, reflect over this sheet, and then I want you to begin interviewing each other. Get to a point that you understand that unique population. If you can, talk to somebody outside your college. Because if you're in nursing and you talk to a faculty member that teaches in engineering, you might learn something really unique about the way engineers function, and the engineers might learn something fascinating about the nursing students. So I will give you a few minutes to draft a couple of questions, and then 10 minutes to do your interview. So I'll be your timekeeper. I'll let you know as time is running out. So how did it go? Were you able to begin understanding the uniqueness of the students that you have in your classes? What was something, maybe from this table, what was something interesting you learned?
It is not so much about the students, rather the kind of things that are taught to the students, because she's from pharmacy and in philosophy. And we discussed about student engagement in the sense that in a class size of 40, you'll always find 15 or 18 who kind of decided, I cannot possibly learn this.
Yes.
I have it often in philosophy, so she would say that I'm a theater major, how can I possibly read writing? So this is not the judgment after reading something, this is the judgment before reading something.
All right, so you're dealing with a lot of students that have this belief about themselves that I don't even need this or I can't learn this.
Yeah, and her answer to my problem was that she focuses on implementation, on design, application. Yeah, and on designing teams, finds out how to find out the most productive members. But here I have a problem because there may be sciences, philosophy, disciplines, which are so far removed from application that you cannot find an application. But
It's just theoretical.
Yeah,
think inspiration based.
Not even philosophy, think of mathematics. You may never be able to apply anything in life. That does not mean they don't give understanding. Yeah. So there's two kinds of subjects. And again, the same thing, it makes the notion of productivity and engagement somewhat fuzzy. So we don't know how to solve it.
Okay, so we
And also we talked about the nature of the course too. So as she mentioned, like in pharmacy, we have both basic science and clinical. And you can connect these, but in psychology, it's more reading intensive. It's like hard to engage the student. She uses the blackboard and
Yeah, in political theory, what do you gain if you understand what is to be a good citizen? Maybe immediately nothing.
But hopefully down the road.
Yeah.
What we can understand.
But someone has to believe in hopefully down the road, and that's a
Yes.
faith and a belief.
So that's an interesting topic, which pushes into some of the motivation theory, which come chat. I have some papers we can start looking at. That's another area of interest of mine, but quite a deep subject. But it is valuable to call that out, to realize that you need to pay attention to the things that do motivate your students. Maybe it's an effort in, hey, I need to go sit down with those 18 students and figure out why they have that belief about themselves. Because once you have that information, you can actually begin to ideate stuff. Because if you don't know why, it's really hard to solve the issue. That's awesome. Okay, what about this table? What were some interesting things you learned about the students that you all largely are TAs for right now? Anything?
I can say something.
Sure.
Sorry. No, I was talking to. Okay. and it was a lot about innovation and entrepreneurship
Great.
and how students need to take risks in themselves and challenge their ideas and believe that they are good ideas, right? So that they cannot think outside the box, and sometimes they have an idea and they don't think it's good enough.
Yeah.
So the challenge is how to have them, and I think there was a phrase that was
Risk-taking?
behaviors.
Oh, okay, so encouraging. So maybe
Risk-taking
the students right
behaviors.
now, you're seeing they're not comfortable with risk-taking.
Well, the thing is, the students, well, for innovation entrepreneurship, if you go, it's really hard to get the, innovative ideas. So for students, most of the time it's like, well, I'm just a student, I try to finish a project, just get the,
Just get the grade.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But what if, you push students really think, it's not always about the novel ideas, about something you can sense from the market needs. Like we share some ideas, like a professor takes a notebook to write, there's something really interesting. What if it existing? Even I don't know the technique solutions, but
Yeah. Being able to help, so one of the things I struggle with a lot in our design course, which feeds into an entrepreneurship course, is helping our students realize that there's a difference between implementation and ideation. In ideation, you can take all the risk you want, because it doesn't have to be possible. It's just brainstorming. It's just coming up with great ideas. It's an implementation when you begin to really start to critically think about how do I bring these ideas that are way out there and bring them back. So that's great.
So
So
how to network.
and how to network, how to get it to that point, and realizing that you don't have to have all of the skills in yourself, but you can find the skills if you are willing to recognize which ones
so
you
it's about risk-taking behavior as well as a problem-solving belief.
Excellent. What about this table? Was there anything interesting that you all learned about the students that you teach? I know, perfect timing, right?
What I think we realized was me and Cynthia were talking about the issues that she has right now. She works on the Dean's office with liberal arts. And one problem that she has is the deficiency of students communicating and writing. So I think it's something that we all see in all the colleges.
So a need for writing
Yes.
skills and
So
improvement.
even once they've already taken the writing courses, it still does not.
I'm fairly certain any of us that do research and have students writing for us or have writing projects in our class would absolutely attest to that. Okay, so I wanted to give you a quick snapshot of the students that I see on a pretty regular basis. This is going to be very familiar to all of you because we're all here at UTEP and we all recognize that our student body is largely Hispanic. People are largely coming from here in El Paso. One of the things that's interesting, because when I start doing leadership activities, what's the most practical way to help students begin learning leadership skills while in school? Put them on teams where somebody has to start leading. Well, one of the major drawbacks to doing teaming is that so many of our students work part-time or full-time. For a lot of them, they have family responsibilities. That makes teaming tough. especially if you do it in every single one of your classes. A lot of our students live at home. For eLead, we're an engineering program, and the average for engineering programs is actually around 20% female. 20% women engineers typically, but we're actually seeing closer to 30 or 40%. So we, as an engineering program, have a different student population that is the norm within engineering, and so we are having to continue rethinking how we do this thing we call engineering leadership. The other thing that we find here at UTEP, and this is more relevant if you're outside of UTEP, our students are not as calculus ready as we want them to be. There are other partner schools that we work with. I mean, Yvonne knows Olin College. Their students are like top tier. They have no issue with having students that are already programming, already doing calculus, have all the prereqs they could possibly need to get into the engineering program. Whereas here, as many of you know, we have a pretty much open access policy. If you want in, we'd love to have you, and we're going to help you get to that level of excellence that we want. The thing that's also unique about our students is they have unique interests. I've found it really interesting that I sit down with our students sometime and I ask them, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? Not that you aren't grown up yet, but what do you want to do when you graduate? And their response is usually nothing to do with engineering. And so I'm trying to recognize that's a strength for my students, because that's not what I experienced when I was an undergrad. When I was an undergrad or when I was in grad school, everybody's like, I'm going to be an engineer, and that's like what everyone said. But our students are very aware of options outside of engineering, ways to use their engineering beyond the typical path. So as I design activities, and as you are designing activities today, I want you to be keeping in mind these unique strengths and a couple of issues and challenges that we need to work with, because we can flip that part-time job into a strength if we are willing to spend the time to ideate around that and figure out a way to make that happen. So, as a quick plug for eLead, just to explain where I'm coming from. So engineering leadership is a brand new program. We've had one cohort of students graduate. Our second one graduates this May. eLead was started with this idea, like I was saying, of not all engineers go into engineering. And when we talk to industry, we're finding out our engineering students need a diverse set of skills. Not just the technical, I can solve an equation, but we need those professional communication skills. We need the leadership skills. We need the teaming skills. We need all this understanding of the business and the industry that they're going into. And so as we began thinking about this eLead program, we aren't trying to supersede any of the other ones, but we see it as a different type of engineering, a more holistic, general type engineering that allows our students to also step into this leadership, business, entrepreneurial space. And so for us, our foundation is set within that space of leadership, business, and innovation and entrepreneurship. So this is what our classes look like. We spend a lot of time with Post-it notes, as you can see on this table. We spend a lot of time doing design, human-centered projects. It's very much a project-based curriculum where we work with our students to help them have some of those practical hands-on skills while they're in class. So when we talk about leadership, we use those teaming experiences to help them begin to understand what it's like to be in industry, work on teams, but also how to lead. We begin to do that intentionally, and as we do so, our framework for leadership development is around what we call the 3 C's. Character, capacity, and competence. Character is who you are. You don't know who you are, it's really hard to lead other people. It also dictates the mission and vision that you have when you're leading a team. It's the character that brings people to you because they want to follow you. They think you're interesting, they think you're nice, they think you're ethical, they think you're trustworthy. Those character qualities. So we spend some time intentionally thinking about how do we instill the type of character that our students are striving for. Within capacity, we're trying to build what the students can do, not just what they know, which is the competence piece. They learn a lot of competence. They take general engineering courses. They take the engineering core. So they get the competence in the engineering content, but what we're focused on is also business and leadership competence and the capacity to do something with it, to be able to apply the information that they've been learning. So this is the framework we use when we talk about leadership in our program. So this is really high level, so I want to break this down a little bit more. I'm working on a paper right now talking with a couple other institutions that have realized that within rethinking how they teach engineering, leadership is an underlying theme in how they're doing this. Some explicitly, some more implicitly. And so we're talking about what are those skill sets that our students need to have as we're developing them through that prior framework. So we're realizing leadership is all about working with people. You have to be able to communicate. You have to work on the team. You have to begin addressing your biases, genders, religions, whatever bias you may have towards other people on your team or the people you're designing for. What are those assumptions that you may have? Then we're talking about within your leadership, you have to understand the context in which you are putting some sort of engineered solution. You have to understand that context. You have to understand the impact that that solution is going to have on the environment, on the people on your team, on you as a leader, as the community, all different levels. And we talk about the economics of some stuff. It's a reality. Even if you work for a nonprofit, there's some money that has to go across the table to make that work possible. So we begin talking about what is that impact that you're having on the community. And then also, as leaders in the engineering space, they need to have some level of engineering technical skill. They can't claim to be engineering leaders or leaders in psychology if they don't have some technical skill in the area in which they're trying to be a leader. So this is where we begin. Now, I have a question across the bottom. Where's the theory? It is completely embedded. When we teach leadership, we have a text and we go through the text, but let's be honest, it seems like every discipline has a different leadership theory. There's so many out there. There's literature about the fact that there's lots of leadership theories. But from my own experience and the experience we've had in our program, we've realized that theory is not the thing that we're too worried about. The students can read that. It's the practice that we're more concerned about. So I'm not going to throw a bunch of any more theory than this at you. We're going to start talking about, like, how do we build in some of these communication skills into our team activities? How do we think about critical thinking? How do we do some of this? How do we help our students practice it in the classroom setting? As opposed to how do I just regurgitate some theory at them? So we spend a lot of time thinking on a more reflective basis in our teaching. We have them do some things, practice some things that we have intentionally scaffolded, and then we spend some time reflecting back. You've done some reading, here's some theories, how do you see that applying in the experience you just had? Helping them apply, reflect, and mold their own definition of what it means to be a leader. So I want to introduce, I'll answer a couple of questions quickly, but I want to introduce the framework that we use to create activities that integrate this leadership activity into it. So any questions about leadership, the ELEAD program, how we do this? Anything at all? Awesome. Either y'all are in a food coma or I did a great job explaining. So what I want to introduce now is a tool that we use to create activities in the classroom for the sake of practice. Like I said, the theory side of things, they can go read it to their heart's content, but it'll go in one ear, out the other, if I don't get them doing something with it. So I'm going to give an example of how I use this framework and how I use it to create a couple of activities in the ELEAD program as my way of explaining how this particular framework is used.
I have a quick question, actually, if you go back to the slide.
This one?
No, the next one. Yeah, so the way it is going, so from goals to activities, and then you're doing an assessment at the same time?
So the way that this framework, let me give a quick rundown. So you all have a copy. So the way that this framework is used is we start at number 1. Honestly, you can start wherever you want, but for today we're going to start at number 1, and I start at number 1 because number 1 is the students, the people at the center of the design work that you're doing, the students in your class. So what you end up doing with this handout is you fill in, who is it, what makes them tick, all the stuff from that prior slide that I was talking about. I have students that work, I have students that don't like reading, I have students that don't know how to write well yet. So I own the unique skills and weaknesses that I know my students have, and I call them out here in the center. I call it out here in the center. I understand who it is. Then we began thinking about what goal do I actually have for my students. So I may list them out. Maybe I want my students to learn critical thinking. Maybe I want to help my students learn how to give an oral presentation. Maybe I want my students to learn how to reflect on an assignment. Maybe I want my students to learn how to provide feedback and criticism to their peers, critique to their peers. Whatever it may be, I call it out. For me, I always end up couching it in alongside a technical skill. It's an engineering program. I want to couch it in amongst some of these professional skills in with an engineering content.
So you have a time frame with goals.
You have?
You have a time frame, right? With goals, you have a period of time.
Yes. Over the course, I may have a variety of goals. You can use this for the entire course if you have one major goal that you're trying to achieve, or you break it down into smaller ones and you do each individual activity throughout the course. Then I design, using thinking ideation as your next step. I begin thinking about what are some activities I can use to help my students here in the center get to those goals. So once I know what I'm trying to teach them, how we're going to teach it, then I start thinking about how do I assess whether they've learned what that goal is. So the reason, though, that the students are still in the center is I want to make sure that that assessment is fair to the students, actually aligns with the assessment that we're doing, aligns with the activity that's happening in class, and also one of the things that we call out are what are the students actually producing? They may be producing a presentation. They may be producing a physical prototype, because it's, for me, engineering, physical prototype. Or it could be that they are producing a paper. They're writing something. Something is being produced in most activities that students have. Maybe it's filling out the homework assignment. But personally, I like to get more creative. For my assessments, I don't tend to rely on homework and exams. I try to push to think about what else would be motivating for my students. What would make them want to do the assessment? So I start thinking about all of these together. So let me give you an example of how I do that. So one of the classes that I teach, I've alluded to it a couple times, we used the handout that you had for your interviews. One of the classes I teach is this course on engineering design, what we call people to products. There's a sister course that goes with this, that's products to people. So in the fall, when I teach, I'm focused on helping my students understand who it is they're designing for, and what product would need to solve that issue. Now, not every issue, not every need needs a product, but we're engineers, we're more focused for this class on the product side of solutions as opposed to the service side of solutions. Not that the process has to be used only with products. So in this particular class, as I'm starting the semester, it is really important for my students to understand the value of critical thinking and observation of the environment around them. They need to be able to look and see the behaviors of the people that they're working with. Interviewing is not the only way. If you look at your form, I have look, ask, and try. The default from our students is going to be asking questions. They'll go out and they'll ask some questions. It's awkward, but they'll get there. What's more important is for them to be able to pull on those skills to look, to observe, and to get out there and just try it. I have students that are working on designing this sensor system for motorcyclists to help them notice vehicles coming up on them to reduce fatalities by helping them see cars coming. This week, I'll admit, we've been working on this for a month and a half, and I asked my team, have you sat on a motorcycle with a helmet on yet? And they go, no. I was like, you need to go sit on a motorcycle with a helmet. Because they were designing something that would sit on the bike in front of them. I was like, you realize that helmet comes up to here, and you look down, you're never going to see your thing. You need to get out and try. So, one of the things I wanted to do early in the semester was to make sure my students were being curious and were thinking critically about what they were observing out in the world. So that's my goal. The students are the students I described before, so that's why number one's already taken care of. I personally skipped to number 4. I think on your handout is number 4. Activities. You can do them in whatever order. I just start with students and then I start filling around. So I go to activities. My colleague always goes to number 3. She's an assessment person. Her first thing is number 3, whereas me on the other end, I like the activities because I like doing things with students. So what I had our students do is I told them they need to go out and they need to take pictures of people doing unexpected things, unconscious thoughts. The people that wrap their hair up with a pin and put it out of their way because they need the hair out of their face. People that lean, I saw you doing this earlier, I was observing, leaning on the chair beside her because she wants an armrest but her chair doesn't have one. Helping our students begin to make those observations is important because I just saw a design opportunity. I could start thinking about a chair that has an armrest that could add, remove it based on the desire of the person sitting in the chair. So observation is important. So that's the activity. They go out, they document, and they present and submit their products. They submit the photos with a blurb and a title explaining what is the uncommon or the thoughtless act that was happening in the photo. So for me as an instructor, this is one of the very first activities they do in the semester. It's basically a check, no check. I give them verbal feedback, I tell them, that's not a thoughtless act, you just took a picture of a person. Go do it again. So we iterate until they get it, but there's not a grade other than you did it or you didn't assigned with this one. So this one is just an exploration exercise. The next example that I'm going to show you, so these are examples. Somebody trying to keep the doorknob open, so they used a rubber band.
Right.
Lady with her hair tied up. Another lady in a wheelchair needed space for her stuff, so she put it on the arms. Maybe her, maybe somebody else with her, but she needed some place to carry things on her wheelchair. So these are all design opportunities that our students observed by just going out and taking some pictures. And so we're building those observation skills for our students. So another one, which is a little bit more tied into leadership development, is something I do in our first year course, which is the course we were talking about a little bit ago. There's a lot of history behind this particular class. If you want to hear about it, come and chat with me. But one of the major things that we try to teach within the leadership space is identity. Who are you as an engineer, as a leader, as a woman, someone of faith? Like, what is that makes you tick? Who are you? What is your personality? What makes you excited? But at the same time, I want to teach some hands-on prototyping skills. I want them to start building. Well, you're engineers, for heaven's sakes. They need to be able to do these things. So at the same time, this is a first year course, so our students need to start getting comfortable with communicating and giving presentations and expressing that idea of who they are. And so those were my learning goals for this particular activity. So let me go. This is the activity. What we ended up doing is we told our students, I want you to build an identity sculpture. Based on the idea of Inside Out, we call it the Inside Out Project. I want you to build an identity sculpture. Your sculpture needs to tell your story. You must use our prototyping lab. We're going to teach you how the prototyping lab works, but you have to build a sculpture that expresses your identity and you have to present it to us. And so as a result, the assessment is you got to do some homework to help you extract. We use MBTI and some other personality trait surveys and things like that, assessments for them to start exploring, is this really me? How do I tick? What do I think? We use some surveys on engineering identity. And then they give a presentation, they present their sculpture. Those are all the products that they generate. They give the presentation, they have a physical sculpture. So an example of one of the identity sculptures that we got was from a student this semester. It's a barbell, because the idea is that she realizes that I am a student right now, and I am working out elements of who I am, because she's learning that service is important to her, her character, who she is, and she expanded on this more. I kid you not, most of the time when students are giving these presentations, I'm in tears, the rest of the class is in tears. We encourage them to recognize, hey, this is a public setting, you need to filter this information however you want to. If there's things you don't want to share, don't share it. But we have had some really moving conversations. And the students learned how to use the prototyping lab. For me as an engineer, that's great. So they're learning to communicate because nobody knows them better than they do. So they're comfortable getting up and winging it on a presentation. Let's face it, a lot of these presentations are done the night before, but it forces them to begin thinking about who they are and how they can convey that, which is an important skill as a leader, how to convey that to their peers. So now it's your turn. I want us to begin using your handouts, and I want you to begin thinking about a particular course and activity that you can begin redesigning to think about how can you be building student character, capacity, and competence. And if you want to dig a little deeper, which of these could you begin to address in your class? So we'll give you a bit of time to fill it out. And then let me know if you have any questions. So start with number 1. Call out who your students are. And then call out the goals that you have for them. Start there. So I want you to grab the Post-it notes that are on your table in front of you. I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up, but I want us to have a little bit of time to reflect on what we've discussed, what we've been doing. So I'm going to stick around. Feel free to come by, chat, ask me whatever questions you might have, but we'll wrap up with one last activity and share what you generated. But for now, I want you to reflect on these 2 questions. We're not allowed to hang things on the wall, so ignore the bottom line. But I want you to reflect on 2 things. What is one thing you're taking away from this today? That you're actually, like we said, last step is implementation. You've ideated some stuff on your sheet of paper. Now I want you to own it. What is one thing you're going to actually try to implement? No try. You're going to implement when you leave here today.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then the other thing I want you to reflect on, and this is a practice I would encourage all of us as faculty to do. I want feedback. How did the workshop go? What can be improved? What went well? Let me know. I want to know. I want to be comfortable with feedback. Just like we want our students to be comfortable with the feedback we've given them in their assignments, we as instructors also need to be comfortable with the feedback. So give me some feedback and own it. What is something you're going to try to implement from the conversations we've had today? And then, yes, questions.
Well, I hope I will be able to walk away with this thing.
Yes, absolutely. Take your handout with you.
Yeah, and the second thing I hope to implement is when I go, I'm going to meet my philosophy of science seminar student next week. I'll start with this. I'll put it up. And say that this is what the goal was. That was part of the syllabus. Mm-hmm. We did some of the things, so how close are you to here?
Maybe.
So
that's cool.
I mean, I think we can evaluate their performance
Use
overall
that.
by
Yeah,
that.
I think that's a great idea. Transparency,
Yeah.
sharing structures like this. In that intro course that I teach, I actually bring the students into the design of the course. In fact, they design and teach the course with me. We have a teaching team of undergraduate students that work through that class designing it, and we use that handout, and we try to keep that transparency. This is what I want you to learn. This is how we're going to learn it. This is how I'm grading you, and this is what you're going to produce. And this center circle is why I think this is going to work.
The other thing, I talked about teaching philosophy of science live with bringing the scientists. So I'm going to send this to my 3 scientists as well, saying that how do you think you can contribute more in this way?
I think that's great. Communication and transparency. Any other questions, thoughts, observations?
Just something, I know it, but you reinforce it, we have to start with the students.
Yes.
So sometimes like you forget, I have my goals, I like this activity, and I want them to produce that and get assist, but sometimes you forget your student needs, and I like this, like incorporating the students in designing your course. So we incorporate the students in designing the curriculum, but I never had a student feedback in designing my course. So I think something I would explore in the future before I teach my course, maybe I'll have some students' perspective
I
based
love
on
that.
their need.
That's a great
Also, something I want to do at the end of the course or the beginning, if the current students that went through the course, if they can come up with activities that they think it's important, so I can implement next year.
That's one of the things I would encourage you. A lot of times my students, because we have such a strong environment of feedback, they're very comfortable getting feedback, but they don't always think about whether their feedback is something I can actually address. And so what I end up pushing our students to do is like, great, give me the feedback, but give me an idea of how I can address it. Yeah. Because otherwise, they just bash you with this doesn't work, this doesn't work. I'm like, I know, like I tried.
Yeah.
But encourage them to take some ownership of the issues that they see in the class. We went to such an extreme with that we turned around and said, we screwed this class up so bad, you come teach it. So we literally told the students, come back and just teach it for us, and we'll coach you through the curriculum. You got another set of faculty that just redesigned it. So students are so much more in tune with what makes them excited, how they prefer to learn, what they want to learn. And so I think if you can bring them into that process, your life is going to be so much easier because they can almost tell you what they think would be effective. And they are so much better at criticizing each other. I bring the students in helping me with the assessment piece, and they are sometimes so much more brutal with each other. I have to tone them down because they are so quick to see faults in each other. And I'm like, wait, you need to give them like positive reinforcement here too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, students are great. Takes the right student, but they're great. Any other questions, thoughts?
What do I do with the Post-its?
Keep it for yourself. It's a reflection exercise. If you have feedback for me though, come hand me your post-it. You want a question?
Not a question, just a comment, and I thought it was great that we're introduced to this, what I call a graphical design of education. But it's that middle, it's that sentence says, who are your students? And, you know, having so many more students than I ever had before, I really have to focus on that and do a better job.
And my challenge for myself is that I did that exercise when I first created my courses. All the courses I've taught at UTEP have never been taught at UTEP. They haven't been taught anywhere before. So I created a bunch of courses, and so I'm realizing that I'm now 3 or 4 years in, I haven't reevaluated whether or not it's still appropriate for the student body that I have now, because it's been a couple of years. And I see myself living with what I had designed first, and I need to keep that freshness and continue paying attention to the new cohort of students. I have one class that I teach exclusive, like we've done a good job there, but some of my other classes I need to be thinking about how do I keep that continuous improvement going.
So I have a question.
Mhm.
So we talk about like implementation. So what challenges you faced here to implement some of these ideas?
So you remember how I mentioned that our students tend to work? And that makes teamwork very difficult. So one of the things that I ended up doing, because I needed to design around that, it's a team-based product design course. They have to meet as a team. Product design, when you have diversity of opinions, it works so much better. And so I ended up, instead of expecting them to work outside of class, I put a lab in my course. And I said, you know what? We're not doing anything during lab except you working on your project. And that was one of the things I had to do because more than anything, I wanted the students to have it on their schedule to show their boss and say, look, I can't, I'm in class. So they have 3 hours every week to do all of their team-based projects for the class. And so that's what I end up doing is I try to tease out one of those things about my students that I know are going to make life for them a little bit more difficult, and I start looking, what can I do to accommodate that? And we're a new enough program that we were able to institute something like that. Not all programs have that luxury because their hours and things like that are limited.
So in terms of the teams, what is like your advice or strategies to form teams?
So I have done a little bit of everything. I have done completely random. I have done the order in which they walk in the door. I've gone to the level that I have gotten their MBTI plus their 6 hat. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the color hat of how they tend to lead within a group. And so I will balance the teams based on personality type and leadership style and personality type. So I've done that. I have based it on interest, like which project are you interested on? So I've done it that way. The thing that I think has been the most effective for me is doing 2 things. One, interest, because if you like the topic, you're more willing to work on it. And then I ask my students to provide a golden arrow and a silver bullet. Golden arrow being, I really want to be on the team with this particular person. You get 1 gold arrow. I want to be on the team with that person. And the silver bullet is, I cannot be on the team with this person. And so what I tell them is I will honor your silver bullet, because sometimes there are conflicts that are going on behind the scenes that I don't fully know about, and that's the moment when I can have students without having to tell me if there's an issue with somebody. I just don't want to be on the team. It also gives me a chance to see who is the outcast, because I've had instances where everyone listed the same silver bullet. So I can go back and I can see, oh crap, that one student is the same one for almost everyone in the class, like 75% mentioned that student. I can begin to see if there's something I can do to address that situation. But that I find the most effective, because I only do a 4-person team. So if you know you're gonna have one person you like, and you're doing a topic that you enjoy, it seems to be a little bit more effective. The MBTI, balancing leadership styles, there's even papers that talk about how that's not even effective. But then doing it at random, I find that knowing the students tends honestly to be the best way, because I watch and I observe, but I have that luxury because I'm in a smaller program. I only have 20 students in my class. So I can observe, because I've had them their first year, and I can observe what's going on in the class. I can tell who's not going to work well together. And we mix it up a couple times in the semester so that they know that they aren't stuck for the entire year. And so we have a 2-course sequence where the first time it's random, the second time I choose it, the third time they choose it, and then they get to critique, and they're on the same team the entire second semester. So we mix it up a little bit, but just about every course in the ELEAD program is team-based. And so they get used to it really quickly. And the thing that I have discovered is that in that first course that we teach, teaching them about how to work on a team and the emphasis that we place on it has been the most important of anything we do. Because we set the expectation and the tone about the fact that you're going to be doing this until you graduate. And then when you're in industry, you better get used to working on a team. And we expect all of you working. So we set that tone very early, because otherwise if they've never been on a team, one person works and everybody else sits back. So we established that early.
The professional style, right?
The professional side of stuff. Yeah. Yep. So that, I think, silver bullet and golden arrow is helpful.
Yeah, I like
Interest, and then starting early and establishing some expectation and reflecting on leadership experiences and what's went well and what hasn't gone well. Any other questions? Well, thank you all.
Thank you so much.